Hello, everyone. On behalf of the organizers team, I'd like to thank you for joining us today on the Ukrainian platform for contemporary China. My name is Vita Golod. I am the chairman of the board of the Ukrainian Association of Sinologists. It's my pleasure to chair in this event today, and I'd like to announce the topic of the International Academic Online Conference, analyzing the Sinophone narratives on the Russian invasion in Ukraine. The meeting is recording and will be published soon in the Ukrainian Association of Sinologists social media channels. This conference is organized jointly by the Krymsky Institute of Oriental Studies, National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, the Ukrainian Association of Sinologists, and Helvetica Publishing House, our media partner. The structure of conference includes 3 panels, Q&A sections after each of them, and 2 short breaks after the first and the second panel. Every panelist has only 20 minutes for making a report, the result of personal research on the Sinophone narratives on the war in Ukraine. I would say personal expertise. It was supposed to be 7 panelists attending the conference today, but our colleague from Germany, Carlson Schaffer, canceled his presentation due to personal circumstances. We very hope Carlson will send his research, which is ready, for publishing in Chinese Studies Journal in Ukraine. So now we can start. I look forward to a great friendly discussion and professional questions from the audience. Please pay your attention to the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. So let me introduce briefly the first speaker, Ukrainian scholar Yevheniia Hobova, a PhD in philology, the junior fellow at the Krymsky Institute of Oriental Studies, National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, the board member of the Ukrainian Association of Sinologists. Yevheniia's main research interests are language policies and strategies in PRC, modern Chinese culture, phonology of Mandarin Chinese. Today, Yevheniia will speak about Ukraine's place in the war, the analysis of Chinese state media coverage in spring 2022. You're welcome, Yevheniia.
Thank you, Vita, for the introduction. I'm very glad to see everyone here today. It's really wonderful that we could join this meeting and share our expertise. First of all, I would like to start my presentation with the words of gratitude to Ukrainian armed forces, because today is the National Day of Defenders of Ukraine. And specifically, those defenders are the reason that we can gather together today and to discuss these issues. And what is even more interesting, they are indirectly, but they are influencing these narratives that we will be speaking today. Not directly, but they really are shaping the narratives in the Chinese media, and what they gain in the battlefield is changing the overall sentiment over Ukraine. To have a short description of the project that we had, Sasha Stryzhak, Oleksandra Stryzhak, who is also present here today, and she will be having her own presentation, was also one of the participants of this project in a way. So this is a project that we started in late March, early April, with the help of some of my colleagues. In total, there were about 5-6 people in different times. And it was targeted on assessing the image of Ukraine in official media of China. We gathered a huge database of about 1,000 articles from the official media. They include their titles, link to the page, date of publication, the source, for example, is it Huanqiu or is it something else, then the country of source, what countries is credited as the source for the news. Then the topic of the article, the overall attitude to Ukraine. Is Ukraine shown in a positive, negative, or in a neutral light? The centrality of Ukraine, which means is Ukraine an actor in this piece? Is it central in this news, or is it just somewhere on the periphery? As time went by, we also added, and a research it developed, and we decided to add also a measure of spread of the news, which is how many times it was reposted in other media, and the credibility of the piece of news, which means basically, is it a fake news, or is it true, or is it maybe manipulated in a way? These last two categories were basically developing over time, and we had to then go back and retroactively assess them for the articles we have already processed. And the time range of this database is from March to first week of June, but we basically started it in April. That means that we had to go back and to look at those articles that were posted in March. We could go on post-June, of course, but well, it's quite a big chunk of work for everyone, and we really didn't have the resources to go on. And as we saw, there weren't really much changes in the narratives and in the media overall. So we didn't really see the point of continuing this research. It took a lot of time and effort, and it took a hit on our mental stability in a way, so we decided to call it a day. And in the end, we basically have a good database for the 3 months of the war. So when it comes to this coverage and to these narratives and how they developed and shaped in this period, well, first of all, there was an attempt from the Chinese state to minimize the coverage of the ongoing invasion of Ukrainian territories and just to limit any discussion on the matter. While you could see that social media were bustling with things like Wuxing Gunzuo and other interesting neologisms on Ukrainian war and the invasion of Russia, the official media were pretty much, well, not silent on the issue, but they didn't seem to target, to focus on important news, as it seems, at least from the point of view of a Ukrainian. For example, on March 1st, when Russian troops were marching into Ukrainian territories, one of the news about Ukraine of that day was it is snowing in Kyiv. Well, apparently a very important piece of information while troops are marching towards Kharkiv and Kherson and other big cities. But then within weeks, in mid-March, I guess it became quite clear that there will not be a quick end to the war, and just deterrent tension from it would be disadvantageous. And the number of reports in Ukraine grew considerably in mid-March, and most local news outlets were publishing quite a considerable number of articles daily. This is when we were starting to notice some changes in attitude. While it was, Ukraine was mostly portrayed as neutral in this conflict, it became even more neutral, so to say, as the war went on. Gradually, Ukraine was losing its visibility in this news, although the titles were mentioning Ukraine, were talking about Ukraine, but from the news itself, Ukraine was not an actor. Ukraine was just a background, a backdrop for something that was going on. And that is a tendency that we could see throughout all the period of our observations. Basically, Ukraine was denied being an actor in the war that is going on with Russia. There's a famous, already famous article by David Bandursky where he said that, called President Who, where he notices that Zhenmin Zhibao, People's Daily, is decidedly not mentioning President Zelensky at all, but by his surname or just in general. So there is noticeable tendency of just omitting Ukraine from its own war. So that basically made our research quite difficult. While we were trying to focus on researching the image of Ukraine in this media, it was basically absent from it, although it was mentioned. It changed a bit over time, and Ukraine basically gained some character, so to say, in this report. And it was not really positive one. Ukraine was almost always portrayed as a puppet, as a slave to the West, to the US, and so on, as a rock state that does not want to abide by international laws and just some useless and ignorant countries, so to say. Also, these changes were present in the numbers of articles that were covering the invasion in Ukraine. They grew throughout March, and but by late May, we see a gradual decline in these numbers. This can be attributed to just getting used to this war, and the world doesn't really turn around Ukraine, and there were pretty much a lot of other events in the world that had to be covered in the news. So that was not really a surprise. But from mid-May, I guess, and on, the daily number of written pieces focused on Ukraine was basically decreasing. And other major events were appearing in the spotlight of the media, and the initial concern of the war was basically dwindling. What if we talk about the overall image of Ukraine in the Chinese state media since the beginning of the war? It has been quite ambiguous due to, as I've mentioned, very little focus on Ukraine itself. The actors that were mainly spotlighted in the Chinese coverage were Russia, the US, NATO, sometimes it was the UN, and so on. And Ukraine basically just being an instrument or a puppet for the bigger, greater nations. That is why we see the problem. That is one of the reasons why, I guess, the local people in Ukraine aren't really keen on having good relations with China at the moment. I really believe this is detrimental from the Chinese perspective, from Ukrainian perspective, to continue. I'm sorry. I believe for the Chinese state is really detrimental to continue this policy of ignoring Ukraine for the sake of our future relations, which I believe still have some future. I hope. I'm just checking time to see if I have some yet. Yeah, okay. So aside from this textual database that I have, I also gathered as a piece of visual stuff from several sources, but they were mainly from Cgtm. They were posting cartoons on Ukraine, which didn't really come into our database because, well, it was mainly focused on the textual information and the sources that are in Chinese language, not English speaking. So these cartoons are basically addressed to the international audience, and they have a different audience, they have different targets, but still they add a bit to the overall image of Ukraine that is being built in the Chinese media, be it international or for the Chinese audience. So I will try to share now this little presentation, which it really looks a bit like a comic book, but that's what we have. Yeah. So that's, they are, yeah, I'm sharing. They are presented here in chronological order, more or less, because there's a tendency for reusing those caricatures, those cartoons in different media pieces, but well, more or less we can trace the visualization of Ukraine's image in the Chinese media. So that one is from before the invasion started. As we can see here, US before February 16th, which was the first estimation, I guess, of the beginning of the invasion. So US before February 16, US after February 16, and we can see that, well, the main actor here is Uncle Sam. And that was when the invasion actually started, and China believed that the US will not be going on with support in Ukraine. And we see that the Ukraine here is just a card that's being burned and not being used. And then we see the first attempted peace talks that were going on in early March. And again, we see here Uncle Sam. And this is the first, basically, in the last time where Ukraine is being represented with a human being, unfortunately, in these cartoons. As we go on further, Ukraine just turns into 2 lines of text or just some symbolic thing that barely represents Ukraine in any way. So yeah, here we go, Ukraine crisis. We don't even have Ukraine, we have Ukraine crisis in many of those pictures. Then we have, this was when the US started supplying weapons in Ukraine, and that attracted a lot of attention from the Chinese media as starting the fire and pouring oil into fire. And we see here, we don't see here Ukrainian flag, right? We see just some person, probably a terrorist, well, he's obviously evil. And he's probably from Azov regiment. And then we see, well, Ukraine, there's not even a flag here, right? We have welcome to Ukraine and just bombed out cities in blood. And here we have problems that stem from Ukrainian crisis, visualized here as the hungry African children. And again, Ukraine isn't really present here. One of the latest cartoons, I guess it was the latest, as the Ukrainian crisis and Taiwan Strait crisis are like the 2 main problems for the global economy. And of course, we see who is present here is probably Uncle Sam's hand once again. And the last one, which I'm not sure we can even attribute it to some image of Ukraine, but Europe isn't yellow and blue, which some would argue are the colors of the Ukrainian flag, but they also may be colors of the EU flag, the blue and yellow stars. So you can see how gradually here we get from at least the Ukrainian flag here in this picture, and just then to something that resembles Ukraine, maybe, or maybe doesn't. I will establish sharing now. So this is the problem, the main problem of all the narratives on Ukraine, on the war in Ukraine, Russian invasion in Ukraine, is that Ukraine is not really present. And when it is present, it's not, it doesn't have a positive image. Also, it doesn't really have a negative one. It's always neutral, which brings some hope that maybe Ukraine is not seen in the negative light overall. Well, best case scenario, Ukraine is seen as a victim, which isn't really a good image, of course, but at least there is some hope that this image will not turn into something worse. It seems that Chinese media are trying not to engage in this conflict at all, by all means. For example, and we see that there's much more interest in the news about Ukraine that are somehow connected with China, of course. For example, the most shared, the most spread between these pieces of news were those that were just quoting Zhao Lijian or some other speaker of the foreign ministry of PRC, saying something about Ukraine. So most times when Ukraine was in the headlines, it was when something with China was going on. Like one of the most shared articles was the one about Chinese company DJI, which makes unmanned flying aircraft vehicles, which was somehow involved in denying selling they're produced in Ukraine, or stopping selling them in Ukraine, or something like that. So what we see in general, it basically has a bit of reflection from the Chinese society, I guess. And it shows how this public opinion is being shaped through the Chinese official media. There is a good correlation between that, I guess. But of course, to have any proof of that, that would need separate research of the public opinion, of course, which is not available to us at the moment. Yes, to
Just
repeat.
a few minutes, yeah.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So the thing is, while we're trying to research how Ukraine is viewed and what narratives are around Ukraine in Chinese media, we basically discovered that there is no Ukraine in this reporting and in this media. And when it is present, it's more of a backdrop for its own story. And this means not lack of coverage, not lack of work of journalists and reporters in Ukraine from China, but it clearly shows the official stance of the Chinese government, their neutrality, and not really willing to get into this conflict and take a side in this conflict, whether for ideological reasons or maybe for pragmatic reasons, we don't know. But it clearly shows that China is just willing to wait it out and see who wins. And with help of our defenders, I hope we will win. Thank you.
Thank you, Yevheniia, for the research. I really hope we will discuss positive progress soon in Chinese media. I really hope. And just a quick reminder, we will open up for the questions from the audience in our Q&A section shortly. Please use this option asking Yevheniia or our next panelist from the University of Turin, Tanina Zappone. She is assistant professor of the Department of Humanities. Research interests political science, Chinese soft power, political translation, political speeches, discursive power, and external propaganda. Tanina will report on the Chinese government narratives on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, I would say war, the role of foreign ministry spokesperson, regular press conferences. Zhao Lijiang is the brightest representative of this team, right? Please, Tanina, you are very welcome. You have 20 minutes. I can hear you.
Sorry.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
I was saying that, first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this very interesting conference. I'm very happy, very glad to have this opportunity to share with you what I've learned so far about how the Chinese government is framing its narrative of on the Russia-Ukraine war. And I'm afraid that my presentation is a bit longer than 20 minutes, so I apologize in advance for this. In particular, I'm going to present the preliminary findings of a survey I'm conducting on the corpus, including the transcripts of press conferences held by the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. My research draws upon the definition of national role conception, national role identity proposed by Holsti, and aims to provide insights on how China's leadership conceived at the discourse level the country's role. In particular, the linguistic analysis tries to answer the following research questions. First, how do China representatives refer to the Russia-Ukraine conflict? How do they define the role of China and other main actors in the conflict? And which discursive strategies are mainly used to present different roles? In searching answers for these questions, I build a corpus containing about 65,000 tokens, and including press conferences held from the end of February to the end of September. The analysis is based on a mixed method approach, which combines quantitative corpus linguistics for identifying repeated patterns in texts and qualitative content analysis for understanding uses of language in content. The speakers, of course, are the spokespersons currently in charge for the regular press conference of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who are Ms. Hua Chunyin, Mr. Wang Wenbing, Mr. Zhao Lijian, and Ms. Mao Ning, who was appointed in September. They do not occupy the same hierarchical layer in China's diplomacy, since Ms. Hua is General Director of the Department of Information, as well as Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs, while Wang, Zhao, and Mao are all Deputy Directors of the same department. The reason why I have chosen spokespersons' press conferences as the object of my analysis is that I believe that these conferences provide an interesting perspective on PRC's official narratives, because they represent a sort of bridge, joining a link between politics and media, which are the two pillars of political discourse. And moreover, in recent years, the Chinese government spokespersons gained momentum due to the so-called wolf warrior diplomacy, much more assertive, communicative style. And this shift has attracted great attention to these figures, both domestically and internationally. The data analysis process on the corpus has first regarded the references to the Russia-Ukraine conflict in the corpus. I find out only in 32 cases spokespersons referred to the war as the Russia-Ukraine conflict, in Chinese, 乌冲突. In the majority of the cases, diplomats prefer the syntagma, the Ukraine issue, the Ukraine problem, 乌克兰问题, and whereas the expressions Ukraine crisis, 乌克兰危机, and Ukraine situation, 乌克兰局势, are used as well. Anything short of calling it a war. Actually, the Chinese word for war, 战争, is mentioned in the corpus, but only 4 times, and always by foreign journalists. The lemma 入侵, which means invasion or to invade, appears 55 times in the corpus, but again, almost always in questions by journalists. And when spokespersons use this word, is to refer not to Russia's invasion to Ukraine, but to US invasions to Iraq and Afghanistan. If we look at the Chinese word for attack, 攻击, we find out that it appears just twice in the formula attack to Ukraine, 对乌克兰的攻击. While in many more cases in the corpus, this word is referred to the attacks suffered by China at the hands of US in locutions such as 对华 or 对中国, 对中方, 进行攻击. Never referred to, just once, not twice, referred to Ukraine. So the linguistic choices made by the spokespersons when referring to the conflict bring us to a few preliminary considerations with regard to the reference items. China's discourse on the conflict shows similarities to that developed in Russia, because the choice to avoid using the word invasion, war, attack is consistent with the instructions given by Kremlin. However, in the corpus, spokespersons never use the formula 军事行动, military operation, military action used on Russia's media in the first phase of the war. This point seems to suggest that China is not totally supportive of the Russian side. The Ukraine situation seems to be perceived as a mutual venture, but not a total mutual venture from China's side. By using the word 问题, problem, issue, to refer to the situation in Ukraine, China's diplomats try to assume a neutral stand on the conflict. But actually, the Chinese political lexicon, in the Chinese political lexicon, this word is used to refer to a number of other international situations, such as the Palestine question, the Afghanistan problem, or other cases like this. But in a number of these situations, China China's position is anything but neutral. I'm thinking about the Taiwan question, the Taiwan Wenti or the Xinjiang Wenti. So this word is not really neutral in the Chinese political lexicon. Second, the second consideration we can make from what we have seen regarding reference to the conflict is that the second most common locution used in the corpus to refer to the conflict, namely Ukraine-Weizi, the Ukraine crisis, employs the lemma Weizi, which differently from the case of Wenti is seldom used along with toponyms in Chinese. So in the corpus, beside the expression Ukraine crisis, we find just another case, that of the Syrian crisis, Syria Weizi. And if we look at the clusters of the lemma Weizi in the corpus, it's well evident that in the context of foreign affairs, the word Weizi is mainly used to refer to humanitarian issues, such as the refugees problem. Therefore, the high frequency of the former Ukraine crisis in the corpus suggests that China's spokespersons try to put the spotlight on the consequences of the war instead of the causes of the war. And so they try to put on the stage the situation, the humanitarian situation, the humanitarian issues. And by doing so, perhaps they are just trying to minimize Russia's responsibility in the conflict, and on the other side, maximize the role of the US. This impression is confirmed by the word list of the corpus, where we found that the word Meiwo, US, occurs more frequently than the word for Russia,俄罗斯. So by referring to the war as a crisis, spokesperson also wants to highlight China's efforts to provide humanitarian support to Ukraine. And this point is consistent with the description of Ukraine that we can infer from the corpus. More than once, spokespersons described the country as the forefront for competition between great powers, in a way very similar for what we have already listened by the colleague. Ukraine in the corpus is just a background, just the site of the conflict. Even more often than be described in identity sentences, Ukraine is represented in the corpus as the target for China's humanitarian aids. Here you can see the cluster of the word Ukraine in the corpus, where the verb tigun is found. And every time the subject of this word in China, the object is humanitarian aid. And it's worth mentioning that when the subject of the same sentence is the US instead, the object of the verb to provide always refer to military assistance to Ukraine. Eventually, from what we said about the use of the word gunji, attack, to attack, we can also understand that China, the Chinese spokespersons tend to portray China as a victim, a target of external attack. And this point is consistent with the so-called narrative of victimhood of China, which has been characterizing the Chinese political discourse since the foundation of the PRC. But how do the spokespersons describe other countries? To answer this question, I've analyzed the clusters of the word referring to Russia, US, China, Ukraine, and Europe in a subcorpus composed of only questions and answer which explicitly refer to the conflict. In particular, I paid attention to those groups of words, including an identity verb, such as the verb 是, to be in Chinese, or 作为, to act as in Chinese. By doing so, I found out that in this subcorpus, at least 5 times, Russia is defined as a great, independent, and self-reliant sovereign state that has the right to make its own decisions. And this type of statements seems to have the intention to deny China's involvement in the conflict. Russia is an independent state, so China had no prior knowledge of Russia's military action, for example. It was impossible for China to dissuade Russia without knowing it. And this portrait of Russia is also suitable to remove suspicions that China is backing Russia by providing directly military assistance. As for the US, in the corpus, we find out that 6 out of the 12 identity clauses in which Meiwo or Meifang are subject, the country is portrayed as the country with the highest number of biomilitary activities in the world. This point is significant from various points of view. First of all, it tells us that the Chinese government does support Russia's propaganda, because this kind of utterances echo the allegations widespread by the Kremlin at the beginning of March about the presence of US chemical weapons in Ukraine. But this type of communication also serves the aim to move the battlefield to the globalist information system, where another war is being fought between China and the US. So in the corpus, we can find a number of cases where US is described as the largest spreader of disinformation, or the biggest creator of lies. In the corpus, we can also find a number of cases where the US are defined as the initiator of the crisis. This accusation is reiterated in the corpus and is often in association with the idiomatic expression for 上浇油, which means to put oil into the fire. Another description of the US, which can be found in the corpus, are those of the hacking empire, 黑客帝国 in Chinese, or sanctioning empire, 制裁帝国. This lexical choice, the choice of the word 帝国 in Chinese, seems to allude to the hegemonic nature of the United States and echoes the rhetorical expedient to present China as a defender of weak countries against the imperialistic aims of the great powers. If we look at how China's identity is defined in the corpus, in identity sentences, we find that China is often described as a builder of world peace, a contributor to global development, a defender of international order. It's a great country that is making huge efforts to promote peace and avoid a humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. However, besides saying what China is, spokespersons point out what China is not. We found 2 times in the corpus the rhetorical questions: is China a party? 中国是党是方吗? Again, by saying so, the spokespersons seem to reaffirm that China is not directly involved in the conflict. Last, let's see how Europe is described in the corpus. Significantly, Ozhou and Ofang are the least frequent toponyms in the corpus. As we already noticed, the items referring to US, Russia, and Ukraine are at the top of the word list of the corpus, while Ozhou and Ofang are placed at the bottom of this list. They are seldom mentioned. Europe
Nina,
is...
I hate to interrupt, but you have just 3 minutes left.
Okay, I can do it. Europe is never the subject of an identity sentences, and this suggests that the Chinese side does not consider Europe as an active part of the conflict. Instead, Europe is described as the battlefield again, and in a way very similar to what we already seen for Ukraine, where the US plays their game to reach hegemonic power. But Europe is the part which is paying the highest price for this. If we look at the clusters of Europe, we find out that the word most frequently associated with Europe is the concept of security in the locution European security mechanisms or European security architecture. And this is relevant also in light of another concept which has been launched by Xi Jinping, that of global security initiative, a concept which, according to many scholars, could be interpreted as an alternative to the bloc system created by US alliances and partnerships. It's a call for changes to Asia's security architecture. So going to the conclusion, we could say that as we have seen, on the one hand, China refuses to condemn Russia invasion and share linguistic choices and theories with Kremlin's propaganda. But on the other hand, China presents itself as the earnest supporters of the Pacific solution of the conflict. According to some authors, this inconsistent messaging reveals a difficult balancing act between adhering the principles of Pacific coexistence and protecting the interests of a strategic partner like Russia. However, the analysis reveals that more than protecting Russia's interests, the aim of the Chinese discourse seems to be placing China outside the group of contracting parties, while placing the US as the initiator of the conflict. The discourse emphasizes that China and Russia are mutually independent and presents Ukraine as the site of a serious humanitarian crisis caused by the geopolitics interests of great power. So this narrative, which might sound contradictory, is actually coherent with the nature of Russia-China's relation. As Craig Singleton argues, in fact, Xi's and Putin's marriage of convenience has always been more symbolic than substantive. The partnership is rooted in a mutual loathing of the United States rather than a shared vision of the world. So the Chinese narrative of the conflict echoes these complexities and goes beyond the dimension of Russia-China relations to embrace a much wider perspective regarding China's vision of the future world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we have 10 minutes for Q&A section. And we got one question from Yutian. And I think she addressed to Yevheniia. Her question was about the image of President Zelensky in Chinese narratives. Maybe not official one, but it's interesting to research.
Yes, we naturally didn't focus on that when we were collecting data, but we were noticing some things. And I specifically pulled up some data from, well, I only had time to find for April and May. I will just share my screen again to show you. There it is. So I filtered for, you can see here, I filtered for all the titles that include Zelensky and Zelensky's name in the title. And there's a stats for the attitude towards Ukraine. So in general, was it a positive view or negative or neutral view on Ukraine? So here we see that this is negative, this is neutral, and that is positive. So it's mixed feelings, I guess, as of May. And as of April, it was much more neutral here. So we can see that from April to May, well, in general, it became more mixed. At first, it was more neutral towards a bit towards positive, but in May, it became more mixed. I really don't have data for June, so we can tell if there is a U-turn, as you said. But I have to remind you that we're talking about official media narratives and not the popular opinion. While we were reading news that were quite negative of Zelensky's actions in the official media, we saw a lot of praising President Zelensky's courage in the popular media, in the social media. There were really a lot of, he gained a lot of fans in Chinese social media, surprisingly enough. Some of them, I believe, even more ardent than here in Ukraine. He's really become like this icon for some of them. It's not a really popular, I guess, not really popular sentiment, but it is still present. And that's what I can say about his image. But once again, he's barely mentioned in the main media of China and People's Daily. You wouldn't see his surname. It was just Oleksandra, and that is all. So it really is difficult to talk about any representation or any image of Zelensky while he's being just some president. You don't see much of his direct quotes from him in the Chinese media. I've noticed this changed a bit during the summer and in August when Ukrainian troops were taking back occupied land in the Kharkiv region and so on. So there were much more direct words from him. So maybe this is a positive sign, but it's really difficult to say.
Thank you, Yevheniia. And we have a comment from Ivo Carnero de Souza. I'm so sorry if I spell it wrong. And the guest said that young people in China really support Ukraine, and and there is a huge pressure from the private businessmen asking the government to end any support to connecting to Russia. So is it like a progress, or it would be, it was at the beginning of the war? Maybe that's a question to Tanina. about young people supporting Ukraine. And if we don't talk about official media, but talk about like young people, students, businessmen, what do you know about that?
I'm afraid I don't know very much about that, because my research interest was basically focused on the figure of the spokespersons who mainly interact with foreign media, foreign journalists. So I don't have any evidence, any data about young people. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I have another question for you. So I personally focused on the regular press conference in the first 3 months of the war, but I lost my interest since June, I guess, because the official rhetoric became the same. Every time we can see the same cliche towards Ukrainian conflict or situation, something like that. And all of us were very curious to know, what does it mean Beijing has been going its own way to foster peace talks on the war in Ukraine. So here in Ukraine, we don't really feel any progress from the Chinese side, to be honest. What do you think, what does it mean its own way?
Yeah, I think that this expression is used by the Chinese representatives just to stress that China's position in the war is an independent position. It's another way to point out that China is not on the same side of Russia in the conflict. They are not allied in the sense that China is not backing Russia, providing military support to Russia. So I think that the use of this expression in its own way, in the Chinese way, has the intention to stress the independence of the Chinese position in the conflict.
Thank you so much for your answer and for your professional research. And you are really welcome to publish it in Ukrainian Chinese Studies Journal. Thank you so much. And now we'd like to announce a short break for 20 minutes, and we will see you in 4:20 p.m. Kyiv time. We will be resuming then. Have a coffee or water, I don't know. See you then. We continue our conference on the Sinophone narratives on the war in Ukraine. Let me introduce the next speaker, Ukrainian researcher Oleksandra Stryzhak. She's Chinese translator, PhD researcher in Tsinghua University. Her research interests are political science, security, and conflicts in Eurasia. Today, Oleksandra will focus on how Chinese academic and analytic community sees Russian invasion in Ukraine. And I would like to address to the audience that we expect for the questions and comments and in our Q&A section. Don't miss this opportunity. Welcome, Oleksandra.
Thank you, Vita. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants. Thank you for such a possibility to take part in today's conference on such an important topic. So without any delay, I will just proceed to my speech. So yes, my today's talk is mostly focused on how the Chinese academic and analytical community have seen the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And since, and even before the 24th of February, all of I've studied, have been engaged in, I would say, quite hot debates, but I followed them only online about the Russian invasion in Ukraine, and more specifically the probability of the invasion, the reasons, the background of it, consequences, and influence on countries like Ukraine, Russia, Europe, and China, of course, but also on the major aspects of the, for example, security, food, global economy, globalization, in some regions of the world, like Europe or Asia, or the world as such. The things I'm going to present in just a few seconds are extracts from over 100 texts, commentaries, podcasts, conference results by leading Chinese scholars and institutions. For example, China Institute of International Studies, China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, Academy of Science of People's Republic of China, universities such as Tsinghua University, Fudan University, Renmin University, and so on. So 95% of the materials that I've been following, they were in Chinese and done all by Chinese people, Chinese scholars. So why would we even look to see what the Chinese expert society, what they talk, what they say, how they see the Russian invasion in Ukraine? So maybe it's not as they are taking part in the decision-making process, but for example, at the basic level, they are all of them, like a lot of them, I would say more than 50% of them, they are the professors, the teachers in the major institutions and universities in China. So they kind of communicate with their students and people and so on. So they're also those who actually so from them, people would actually learn something about Russian invasion to Ukraine, about Ukraine. So while they're maybe not the part of the decision-making process, as I said already, but they are sometimes they are those who give some recommendations or commentary to those who actually take an active part in decision-making process. So this is the reason why it's important to study them. So I want to start with the question of how the invasion, of how the war is called. And this is really interesting because I'm the third one to talk about, and we already can compare of what Yevheniia and Tanina have told us. So for example, while in the press conferences of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China, they usually call the war, the invasion, everything related to it as the Ukrainian crisis, Ukrainian issue, and so on, while the Chinese expert society usually call it, I would say the most common word used was the conflict, 冲突. Of course, there were the word special military operation using quotation marks. So mostly it's always so-called special military operation. So at the very beginning, because I've been following experts maybe from the middle of March, but I am still, even now, I'm still trying to find something that was written or said in January and February to see how they were talking about the possibility of the invasion of the big war, as we call it, in Ukraine as well. I'm sorry, I just lost my what I want to say. Okay, maybe it's not that important. Right. For these periods of time, so it's already more than half a year, I have collected a lot of material to see how the narratives, how the focuses of all these experts have changed. So, for example, at the very beginning, the material starting from February and March, especially I would say March, like the biggest part of the studied material, they were trying to understand what are the reasons of the invasion. So sorry, again, I would call it war on invasion, no matter what Chinese experts said in their materials, because we understand that we mean one thing, the invasion. So for the reasons of the war, there are a lot of them. I think the biggest part was actually related to the reasons, and while some would investigate, especially it's very common for the experts from the Academy of Science of People's Republic of China, they always, not always, but they would usually say that the main reasons are the historical reasons, or the cultural reasons, or the political reasons, because Ukraine and Russia actually, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they have taken different paths development, which was not that obvious maybe at the very beginning after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But this is what is actually very obvious now, as we have chosen the democratic path of development, while Russians became very authoritative in the way to govern the country. What is also correlated, I think, really interesting to relate to, as Tanina mentioned, for example, how Europe is being stated in the press conference of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China, and that one of the reasons is also that. So, for example, they would say that the root cause of the conflict, of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, is actually not in Ukraine, but the issue of European security. That is the issue of European security architecture, and the root of this problem is actually the game between US and Russia, but not like Ukraine and Russia, for example. It's the game between the United States and Russia. And the key to resolve this conflict, it's the creation of common, comprehensive, joint and sustainable security architecture concept, which was presented by the Chinese President Xi Jinping, which is also interesting to see this if we compare different narratives from, as I said, from what I've studied, and also from, for example, what Tanina did. And also, for example, if we remember what Yevheniia said at the very beginning, that Ukraine is actually, it's not seen, we don't see Ukraine as as an actor in this conflict. I would say it's actually true, the same for the Chinese academic community. They mostly say that this is one of the most I wouldn't say popular, but the most used narrative is actually right. This is not like Ukraine. It's actually it's a proxy at like now. At this stage of war, we can see that the invasion, the war is already called the proxy war between the United States and Russia. But as Yevheniia, I'm sorry, for example, said that Ukraine is being seen as a neutral. Usually, there is nothing really bad said about Ukraine in those materials that I've studied. Mostly, they would add that, for example, Ukraine is backed by the United States, and maybe without this support, Ukraine will collapse in like those 3 days that Russians gave us at the very beginning of the invasion. But they would actually said that Ukraine is a very good country with nice landscapes, nice people, very good educational system, and so on. So, so sometimes if we see those materials that I used, we will see that there is actually no Ukraine as an active actor in this conflict. But if it is, it's actually represented in kind of a good way as just a good country, whose fate is just not that good. This is also one of the reasons of the war, as one of the experts has said, that this is just a Ukrainian fate. Its fate is like this. This is her minion, as I would say. So also one of the main we would call, so there were like set of those reasons. A lot of them is just, for example, the reasons of the historical or cultural background, or for example, there were those who would say that why, for example, it happened now, because this is how Putin, this is how he saw the world, and he would think that now this is the best opportunity to invade Ukraine, because like United States, they left Afghanistan, that we have COVID and the world is divided. But still, one of the things that pushed toward this invasion was the we all know those Russians' narrative about the NATO role, about the United States role. So also by a lot of Chinese experts, the role of US is one of the main. So without the US, without the NATO, maybe we would not have the invasion. So now I would like to say a little bit about the consequences of the war. And so I have a list of some, which I think is the most interesting in a way that this is not that we would see a lot. If we read, for example, maybe in Chinese media, we would not even have it because they will not dare even to think about it. So for me, for example, was really interesting about that. So as I said just now, that, for example, Putin saw the world divided and that Europe is declining and Asia is rising and is much stronger now. And actually, one of the experts, he said that this conflict actually shows that the West is still strong and the East is weak. And this is the current reality that we have. Interesting was also because I didn't really follow how like Russia is represented. Like so sometimes we would see yes, like Russia is like a superpower, it has nuclear weapons and so on and so on. But some of the experts would say that the war exposed Russia's weaknesses to the world, and as a result, her international authority and the terrorists will be reduced. And like maybe not now, but in a long perspective, Russia would suffer in many of the fields of like, I mean, technology, economy, and so on. Very interesting was the thing that the conflict and the sanctions imposed on Russia by West and United States will increase Russia's dependence on China. This is actually something that we can hear from the West experts. And the thing which like impressed me a lot was that the Russia afterwards, maybe after the war ends or another leader will come, Putin will die, and so on. So they will use every possibility, every opportunity to improve relations with the West, especially in the post-Putin era. So a turn to the West is highly likely. So we don't really need to, we know how the relationships between Russia and China is presented now, like without no limits, everything is beautiful, but they still kind of like, maybe this is just temporary. We still need to think, and we know as Chinese people, they think for not like a year or two, they usually think for 100 years. So they don't reject such a possibility. An interesting thing is also about the influence on China, which is sometimes different. It depends on maybe what the institution the expert came or in which university he studied. So sometimes they would say there would be no influence on China because China is not that dependent in some things as other countries, for example, but still usually many would say that as this is one of the biggest crises now in the post-Cold War era. So there is a huge challenge to the global economy and the global security. So as China is so related to all of the things, it definitely will have an impact on her. So because I still have 5 minutes, right? So yeah, there was also the problems covered, for example, the domestic issues, which is also interesting to read from the Chinese experts, like the biggest challenge, as I said, is not related to the economic, for example, problems or political problems, but lies in the sphere of public opinion. It's just that there is a big divide between pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian netizens and readers in society as such, and it will deepen the political politicization in Chinese itself. And one of the scholars, one of the leading scholars, I would say, in China, without no names, he thinks that it's that Beijing, China should consider those sentiments among Chinese citizens. So I hope that those citizens just rise, and so they will count on them more and more. It was actually an interesting thing what China's role on this on the how to resolve this war, because we know, for example, what President Zelensky recently, he again stated that so like we want China to do something. But usually, some of the experts say that China should take part. But it's just that there should be maybe there's some related issues that don't allow China to take part. So maybe China is afraid of the consequences of taking an active part in the resolution process. But most of what I've read from those experts said that the Chinese role is overestimated. China is not that influential on security issues, especially those that have the global impact. So this is the reason why China actually is not that active in these processes. And what, for example, it's also relates to what Tanina have said about that China is actually more concentrated on the humanitarian issues rather than actually the issue of resolving the war. I also want to say that, so for example, coming back to how Chinese academic and analytic community see the invasion itself. So they would say that this is the greatest geopolitical event after the end of the Cold War. So it's also contradictory to what Putin has said about the collapse of the Soviet Union. But what is actually really interesting is the majority of them actually didn't predict the possible invasion. It was actually just one scholar who openly stated, so he used the mathematical way of analysis and said this is a huge probability that Russia actually would invade Ukraine, but it's just only 40% of possibilities that Russia will actually win that war. So they would say that this is a part or even a link of the great changes not seen in a century. This is a very common thing for the recent years. The Chinese is referring to the 百年未有之大变局. And so, for example, they see the Russian-Ukrainian war as the prolonging event starting from the 2008 financial crisis, COVID-19, American withdrawal from Afghanistan. So this invasion again showed the world that the world has entered a period of accelerated changes. That those changes always come, but there will be just many, many, many of them. Okay, I think I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleksandra, for a nice presentation, professional level. Thank you so much. And we'll also expect for your publishing, can you publish in Chinese Studies Journal in Ukraine? And we have following speakers will report on the topic of China's diverse narratives on the Russia-Ukraine war and its strategic dilemma with the US and Russia. This research project compares two China's English language media, China Global Television Network, Cgtm, and China Daily Global in their narratives on the early stages of Russo-Ukraine war. Let me introduce the speakers. Hu Zichen is a PhD researcher in Media and Communication Department at London School of Economics. Her research interests include public opinion measurement, political history underpinning hate speech and conspiracy theories, exchanges to health and science communication, and the role of media for development. Dong Zhigang is a postgraduate student in global media and communication, now studying in the University of Southern California, with a special interest in politics and communication, the labor in the context of data, and the philosophy of science and technology. Botao is a postgraduate student in global media and communication as well, now studying in the University of South California. Academic interests are soft power, representation, capitalism, and its intervention with the communication and culture. Zichen will start with introduction of the presentation. You're very welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll start by sharing my screen. Yeah, can everybody see this shared slide? Yes, okay. So our research project is credited to Dr. Eva Polonska-Kimugui at the government department at LSE, who supervised our project and made this part of the Mediated War, Mediated Refugee Research Seminar at LSE. So to jump into our presentation, focusing on China's diverse narratives of the Russo-Ukrainian war, we'll start by answering the question, how the comparison between Cgtm and China Daily Global shed light on China's media diplomatic strategy. We will first introduce the background of China's media system and the differences between the two media outlets, and dive into the general data findings worth comparing and contrasting in terms of China's reports of Russo-Ukrainian war, and explain the difference and underlying paradox from a political economy perspective. I welcome my colleague, Botao, to start.
Yes, so can everyone hear me? Okay. So before presenting our research results, we'll first briefly discuss the special characteristic of the China media systems. It is clear that China media system is a state-first and market-led system. Its core focus or motive behind most of their behavior logic and the one-party ideology. The development of China media system is a merge between the Soviet-focused linear four-serial concept and post-Mao era concept of media systems. So this process of combining the Soviet government's totalitarian controlled media systems and Mao's idea of focusing on the people's interest has a constant conflict about how the China media system should be operated. In order to understand the media system in China, it is essential to understand both Lenin's and Mao's legacy, politically, religiously, and culturally. China's media have mainly become a party press. Not only the party connect the local government official, but also to the mass media. And there are two concepts that are important to address. First is the party's parallelism. Unlike American Spanish Revolution or British commercialized revolution of their media systems, the Chinese media system also commercialized by letting the party press has the ability to make the profit by creating the licensing and the sponsor systems. With the commercialized system being implemented, the Chinese press system has separated into two major categories. One for intra-party communication and another for general public. What's more, it's routine for the party media official to be a press media officer, and the manager in the influential news media needed to be appointed with party duty and leadership to consolidate the press loyalty to the party. And second is the soft power concept, which is one of the most important functions of the China media systems to increase China's soft power both innate and outward. Its target is not only to better stabilize their citizens, but also as a diplomatic strategy. It uses media as a tool to rebuild its national image from the Western frame, sharing its China culture globally, and trying to increase China's attractivities to the global context. China media's power is also expanding, since as a state-focused media outlet, CCTV has gained support from the government to invest in and buy out as many as other small international outlets as possible. Those acquisitions significantly increase China's voice on culture around the world. Next, please. So why do we choose to compare China Daily and the Cgtm? First, I will talk about the China Daily. We choose those two media outlets mainly because of their objective and position differences in the China media system. China Daily was the first purely English-speaking media outlet in China. In recent years, its objective has been changed to become an English learning material for the local citizens. However, in the early year, the board editor used Ge's concept of creating the China English in the news media. Its whole purpose was try to Chineseize the language by adding Chinese unique traits and characteristics in English. It can be seen as a way of gaining power in the US English narrative, localize the definition of many global political terms in English, and to create a counterframe from the Western society. Meanwhile, aside from localize the English language, China Daily's demographic target is focused more on the local citizens rather than global citizens. Next, please. As you can see that in global context, China Daily is being blocked out from Twitter, have little followers in YouTube compared to Cgtm. And despite so many Chinese citizens around the globe, but still they have fewer followers on Facebook. And anyone can see that on the right bottom, the local level China Daily has 64 million followers instead of Weibo, but Cgtm only have 5 million followers. Those data and the concept of China English has shown that China Daily is being positioned more as a media outlet for the local citizens, and they will represent how China governments want their citizens to see themselves. Next. So why Cgtms? The full name is China Global Television Network. As the name has suggested, it is focused more on the global television network. The target of this media outlets is much for the global citizens and not Chinese. At the start of the year of Cgtn, she declared that the objective of Cgtn is to show the world that China is a promoter of world peace, a contributor of world development, and a protector of international orders. It shows that the objective of Cgtn is to rebuild their national image from the Western society and to have a voice in the global society. You can see from the image on the side, it shows a proportion of Cgtn active users in social media, and the majority users are from Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, and Facebook. So for answering the question, we choose to compare China Daily and Cgtn because of the objective difference, position difference, and demographic differences. We hypothesize that with those differences, they may have different point of view in the news coverage. And then my team will be presenting some of our research results.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. My section focuses on the differences in the coverage related to Ukraine war between China Daily Global and Cgtn. And firstly, China Daily Global is more likely to cite Xinhua News Agency, which is the Chinese national news agency, than Cgtn. Among news with contributions from identifiable news agencies, the proportion of news that cites or is directly from this agency are respectively 13% for Cgtn and 79% for China Daily Global. And meanwhile, Cgtn also has a more diverse pool of news agencies where Ukraine Forum and Interfax, which is the Russian private alternative to TASS, are also voiced. Next page, please. Yeah. Moreover, regarding the frames, although most of the articles from the two outlets remain neutral or try to remain neutral or ambiguous, Cgtn is relatively more likely to portray Russia negatively. There are two reasons. First, this accords with Cgtn's objective of constructing a proper national identity abroad, as mentioned by my colleague Botao. And secondly, I think Cgtn publishes articles from local journalists. Specifically speaking, while only one news from China Daily Global used the description of military offensive to Ukraine, Cgtn are more likely to consider the role of Russia as the invader, whether by using the words like Russian invasion, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or contextually just describing it as such. However, I would say overall, the wordings like Russian invasion are still seldom when compared to those more neutral ones favored by the official and therefore understandably also favored by Cgtn and China Daily, like Ukraine-Russia crisis and the direct quotation of special military operation. Something very interesting is that actually the only one case of the phrase military offensive to Ukraine in China Daily is actually from Xinhua News Agency. And moreover, Cgtn also publishes personal and less distanced stories that portray the Ukraine people positively. And this is what China Daily doesn't offer. Next page, please. For instance, Cgtn reported how Ukraine orphans suffering from war faithfully and willingly help the Ukraine army make camouflage netting, as 14-year-old Masha said, and I quote here, "It's the way we can help our soldiers to protect their lives." And children here in this story obviously distance our soldiers from the others, namely the Russian troops and the invader. Cgtn also reported in the flame of war of a couple cherishing love and family. Last but not least, the distribution of settings is also deserves some attention. Though the core event is the war between Ukraine and Russia, the most reported setting goes to none of Russia, Ukraine, or Central Eastern Europe, but goes to the categorization of global in our research, among which UN, US, China, and the UK appear most frequently. And after looking into, next page, thank you. After looking into the relevant news pieces, one shared agenda of both outlets appear, which is when possible, China will strategically differentiate itself from, and understandably sometimes together with Russia, given the comprehensive strategic partnership of cooperation between two countries now, and then criticize US and its allies for causing the conflict. And as I quote here, China-Russia ties are no alliance, no confrontation, fundamentally and essentially different from the small groups the US has been pursuing based along ideological lines. That's a quotation, yeah. And my colleague, Jess, will dive into deeper the phenomena and try to explain it.
Thanks to my colleagues, in my part, I will try to explain the paradoxical and fluctuating status of these two media outlets based on China's dilemma in its relationship with Russia and the US. Starting from the implicit pro-Russia standpoint by China Daily Global, on the one hand, China and Russia share the similar dissatisfaction with the existing global status quo of power distribution. On the other hand, Russia is also the biggest energy supplier to China, so that China does not really dare to stir confrontation with it. In addition to the international relationship dilemma, China Daily Global's media agenda is also driven by the need to stabilize domestic politics in the context of economic recession contributed by the pandemic as well as energy crisis. Humanitarian touch on the war and challenges to Putin's power monopoly risks backfiring the legitimacy of strongman politics in China's domestic political sphere. Given that the major audience from China Daily Global are from mainland China, the solution to mediate the domestic political and economic tension is to divert the despondency to the manufactured villain, that is the US, in a new Cold War mentality. China Daily Global, while delivered in self-claimed standard English that demonstrates its journalistic professionalism and an attitude to be so-called open to the world, shows the conservative ideological project of Chinese Communist Party that it serves. The conservative trend is exemplified in the recent change of the guiding principles of Chinese Communist Party's economic and social development, from peace and development to security and development. By emphasizing on security, China aims to reduce its dependence on the global economy and reclaim self-sufficiency and autonomy. This economic trend of turning inward also implies an ideological shift in boosting nationalism and justification for more assertive and aggressive foreign policy towards the US. While China Daily Global delivers nationalist and anti-US ideologies to China's domestic audiences, Cgtm plays its counterpart for the benefit of China in globalization, given to the fact that China is one of the biggest beneficiaries of the existing system and more dependent on globalization than Russia. It should be noted, however, that globalization has been a very contested concept and vision. While China Daily Global's narratives represent China's predicament of the monopoly of the US in global political economy and are mainly circulated in China's domestic sphere, Cgtm's narrative aims to reduce the extent to which China has been isolated in international relations. China seems to play clever by using different strategies to its domestic and international audiences that propagate similarly very contradictory attitudes to Russia. However, it remains unclear if Cgtm is the most representative example of China's media diplomacy to the global audiences. And it is also unclear if the difference in media reporting strategy between Cgtm and China Daily Global can be significant without robust evidence from audience research. For people who happen to read these two media outlets at the same time, the position of CCP seems a bit schizophrenia. It is such a contradiction that reveals the urge of Beijing to convey its message to both the world and to domestic audiences to cope with China's strategic dilemma in between the US and Russia. The ideology underpinning such a strategic balance can be traced to China's philosophy of dialectics that uses contradiction to understand relations among objects or events, to transcend or integrate apparent oppositions, or even to embrace clashing but instructive viewpoints. This philosophy is implemented in China's seemingly contradictory narratives of the Russo-Ukrainian war. And It is also exemplified in China's so-called double circulation principle, consisting of both an open economy that caters for globalization benefits and a very conservative trend in domestic politics. This philosophy or mindset raise ethical dilemma, of course, in cases that such a seemingly contradictory thinking justifies the ambiguous position, rather than demonstrating a swashbuckling or whistleblowing attitude that celebrates justice. However, what counts as justice is always a fluid discourse interwoven by power dynamics. As China is situated in such a dilemma between the US and Russia, same as the history that China went through stuck in between the US and USSR, China chooses this ambiguous attitude by mixing diverse narratives that speak to different actors for the sake of China's own benefits and interests. Is that clever or morally dubious? We are happy to take questions and thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our Chinese colleagues, especially we know that it's early morning in California right now, so. Okay, so we have Q&A section right now, and we got one question for Tanina again. People just impressed by your presentation and like to ask again on your report. The question from Oleg Timokhin. What are the criteria for assessing the emotional coloring of a message? Negative, positive, neutral? How did you rate? What did you base your assessment on? Is it your subjective assessment?
Well, assessing the emotional coloring was not one of the aim of my presentation. I mentioned the neutral tone, the neutral connotation of the word "wenti" issue, questions, and crisis to refer to the war in Ukraine. But I did it just to highlight that actually these two words are anything but neutral, because they are used with apparently with the intention to demonstrate the neutral stand of China. But as I said, they have a connotative dimension which suggests different interpretations. So I didn't evaluate these words as neutral, positive, or negative. I've just because I didn't have any criteria to do that. I've just tried to emphasize the ambiguity of the lexicon, the Chinese lexicon about the war.
Thank you so much. And another question to Oleksandra. What effective measures for promoting the pro-Ukrainian information agenda among the Chinese academic community do you see?
Somehow I think we should be engaged mutually, but as I know, it's somehow, how to say it, it's a little bit, how you say "mingan" in English, чувствительный. It's a little bit, so they need to be sensitive, right, quite careful with that, because for example, like in the university I studied, Tsinghua University, there is a famous peace something conference, and there was a panel related to the Russian invasion in Ukraine, but actually it was called something, I think, Ukrainian issue panel or Ukrainian crisis panel. But it was kind of, I don't know whether it was made by purpose or it's just they don't know anyone from Ukraine, which is also strange, because my supervisor at least could somehow ask. And So for example, on that issue, I was really surprised that, so there was okay, I wasn't that surprised, but it still was kind of like, why not? It was, so there were, hopefully there were representatives from England. I remember he was quite like, we need to call things by their names. So it's not like Ukrainian crisis, something, this is Russian invasion of Ukraine. But there was a Russian representative taking part in that conference, but unfortunately not Ukrainian one. So I think what now is open to us to somehow, I don't know, maybe like some of my colleagues, for example, he found the email of one of the scientists. I don't remember. I think his name was Huwei. Maybe he's not that leading scholar and scientist on Ukraine and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Eurasia as such. But so he got his email and he contacted him and he got the message back. So this is one of the possible paths for us. Unfortunately, I think there are not that much of chances to take a part in some kind of big conference and actually say a word about what is actually happening here, especially if there's someone from Russia. But I think only maybe private contacts for now.
Thank you so much. And if I may, I have a question to our Chinese colleagues. You are studying global media and communication in the US and Europe, and you can compare the narratives from both sides, Western and Chinese. How can you comment this huge difference to your friends in China and your Western friends in like personal relationship level? Because you have expertise as researchers. It's hard to remain neutral, right?
Can I take the question?
Yes.
I think there's not really a thing about the homogeneous attitudes based on nationality or where the person is situated. It is more dependent on their habits of social media use and their own political bias or political standpoint. And I admit that if I talk to like my relatives in mainland China, they might share very different views. And for me, the tip is not to really try to persuade someone of something, but try to think critically about where these different viewpoints come from based on different contexts and how the certain ideologies are formed from a more scholarly view rather than being easily emotional or sentimental.
Thank you. Any other answers?
Yes, and so from my perspective, that aside from news coverages and scholars' analysis for this event, there's a lot of personal and lower levels of opinions based on Ukraine and Russia. There's a lot of people who is citizens in China that is very pro-Ukrainians, and there's also a lot of people who is very pro-Russia. So there's a deep conflict between the citizens, and I think that it is important for the scholars and to actually to publish and to be more announced about the research that has been done within the field rather than the pure news coverages, because the pure news coverages will always be biased and will always have a standpoint. So that's my point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add on about the complexity of the domestic, the civic discourse on this war. There are also some people that are very suspectical to Russia, especially regarding how Russia has, according to their words, how Russia has taken some land from China. So, and actually they are making jokes, satiring the weakness of Russia also. So that's kind of a complexity. Yeah, that's my comments.
Okay, thank you so much. And another question to Zichen. Why different editorial lines need to be seen as dilemma or as something strategic? Chinese editors have some lines they can't cross, but editors have freedom too in most issues.
Yeah, this question should go back to China's media system. The very different, very diverse narratives about Russo-Ukrainian war is based on the different demographic, based on the different audiences that they speak to. And the two media outlets that we study are state-affiliated media. So their attitudes are actually in line with the CCP rather than like the editors, their own point of view. So that is why the different narratives are a crucial cutting point for us to investigate what the like diplomatic dimension, diplomatic dilemma might be underpinned.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. And I'd like to take a second short break for 20 minutes before the third panel. And we will resume, I guess, at 5:30 p.m. Kyiv time, if you don't mind. So we will see you very shortly, 5:30 p.m. Kyiv time. Thank you so much. Okay, we are continuing our discussion, our conference, and the third panel starts with a scholar from Lisbon University. It's an honor to have António dos Santos Queirós, Doctor of Philosophy, a researcher of environmental philosophy and ethics at Lisbon University, member of Watching Research Center at the University of Hong Kong, area of interest, social and political philosophy, values theory. Dr. António's presentation will be on the Ukraine conflict and Russian invasion and China claim for new strategy to international system. António, you are very welcome to start your presentation.
Thank you. Greetings, my dear colleagues. What is the position of People's Republic of China face the Ukrainian war and the Russian invasion? The answer needs using a negative heuristic and a positive heuristic. And first of all, understand the international policy of China in a context of global geopolitical confrontation. We live in a new world where mass media and social media are monopolized. It's not easy to build a critical thought. After 50 years studying China, I always return to the critical issues. What represents the concepts of new democracy and the socialism with Chinese characteristics, and the revolution to ecological socialism and the pilot zones towards eco-civilization? Time Review calls People's Republic of China a hybrid model of quasi-state capitalism and semi-democratic authoritarianism. Around the world, different research postulate a common idea. China, successful reform, has produced a system that is not the same as Soviet Union, not like Anglo-American democracies, and not like Asian developed states. That last vision was adopted by American Senate after a long debate for 2 years from 2016 to 2017 that decide federal government must increase the economic and diplomatic engagement with China. But in 2021, a critical turning point happened. The Department of Homeland Security launched the so-called China Strategic Action Plan to counter the threat posed by the People's Republic of China. This document is practically unknown by the public in the West, but was taken seriously by the government of China. Is the key to understand the intensification of hostile campaigns about Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Taiwan, and incidents like the suspicious around the 5G technology, and explain why China blames the United States that is pushing the international system toward the direction of de-Sinization, elevating the status of G7 and downing the importance of G20, and roll it out new multilateral arrangements that exclude China, like the Quad and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. But returning to the Chinese philosophy, the standpoint of my research, it is, if the People's Republic of China represents a new historical experience of democracy and socialism, the Western conceptual framework of political hermeneutics is not adequate to understand the People's Republic of China. And by this way, I find successive propositions not falsifiable that must be better studied, like socialist market, one country, two systems, that represent distinct phases of a new historical regime, different from liberal democracy and Soviet Union socialism. Those regimes did not represent the end of history and the unique way to socialism. And yes, I think that we need a new conceptual framework to understand the Chinese way into a new era. That is the mission of the political philosophy. In the classic China, the philosophers tried to be part of the imperial council, but the doors of the palace remained closed. Then they have gone to the people, spreading philosophy. In the People's Republic of China, the political philosophy, without lost its popular roots, came now from the state power, from a party with 95 million of militants and youth organization with 75 million, supported by a coalition of 8 democratic parties that founded together the People's Republic of China, based in the fundamental test that guarantee that those parties have the constitutional right of shared power. A political system based on the multi-party cooperation and political consultation and people's assemblies. The critical research to understand the Chinese way to a new era, it is the political philosophy, from its classic roots to the modern contribution to the political philosophy. If you look to the last 100 years, China let 100 flowers blossom and 100 schools of thought content, science the 3 principles of the people, from Sun Yat-sen to the eco-civilization of Qi. 2 main principles define a collective awareness of China about international policy: respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity and peaceful coexistence. Lao Tzu wrote that you must respect the intrinsic law of nature and things, acting without acting, what means act with minimal interference, but with firm will and moral sense, and wrote, when Tao is present in the universe, horses instill manure of the field. When the Tao is absent from the universe, horses are created at the doors of cities. Violent men will die violently. The way of peace crossed the political of the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence from Mao and Zhou Enlai, remembering mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, mutual non-aggression, no interference in each other's internal affairs, equality and cooperation to mutual benefits, and peaceful coexistence. The 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, integrated in the preamble of the Constitution of the People's Republic of China, was adopted by the non-aligned movement in the core of Cold War and reproduced in the BRICS, the Belt and Road Initiative, and are present in all international agreements of China. At the United Nations Science 1991, more Chinese abstention and all its vetoes have occurred on issues that involve territorial integrity, primary sanctions, and the jurisdiction of international criminal courts. Facts proven by international independent research that concluded, and I quote, these votes directly correspond to China promotion of 5 principles, especially the principles of mutual respect for territorial and sovereignty and mutually no interference in internal affairs of other states. Safeguarding world peace is too one of the 3 historical tasks of Chinese socialism pathway proclaimed by Deng Xiaoping. The second, achieve national unification, applying the principle of 1 country, 2 systems. And the third, promote common development with the reform and open head. The Chinese political declaration after the telephone call of 25 February 2022, when President Xi Jinping spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin, postulate, I quote, China supports Russia in resolving the issue through negotiation with Ukraine. China has long held the basic position of respecting all countries' sovereignty and territorial integrity and abiding by the proposals of principles of the United Nations Charter. Xi Jinping said, and I underline the basic position of respecting all countries' sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I remember the Tao, acting without acting. What mean act with minimal interference, but with firm will? Russia must respect sovereignty and territorial integrity and moral sense, abiding by the proposals and principles of United Nations Charter. Russia began the first peace talks in the day after. The political speech also need to be friendly and retained. President Xi added, it is important to reject Cold War mentality and reach a European security mechanism through the negotiation. In synthesis, China do not support the Russian war, but do not agree with the escalate of sanctions, considering that it injures innocent people, do not respect the international law, and could push the world to the recession and economic chaos. The metaphor of mentality of Cold War is a critical reference to the NATO, a continuing military deployment eastward, admitting that the deployment has challenged Russia's strategic headline. And China, in parallel, proposed the Global Security Initiative for Peace, introducing a new principle for a sustainable security, the principle of indivisible security. Chinese President Xi Jinping on June 15 held a new phone conversation with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, and recently a personal talk. And China do not change their position of principle. The Russian president now says that support the Global Security Initiative for Peace. We will be. And in the recent United Nations Assembly, the speech of Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov represents a strategic inflection that must be considered. The last but not least, during the 77th United Nations Assembly, one day before the referendum, Chinese Foreign Minister, in a meeting with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, said that Chinese President Xi Jinping has pointed out that sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries must be respected. The proposals and principles of the United Nations Charter must be fully observed. The legitimate security concerns of all countries must be taken seriously, and all efforts that are conducive to the peaceful settlement of the crisis must be supported. What were the Global Security Initiative for Peace and the principle of indivisible security? President Xi Jinping proposed the Global Initiative for Peace on the annual conference of the Balfour Forum for Asia, April 2022. The principle of indivisible security rejects the path of building one's own security at the expense of the security of others, the opposite strategic concept that led to the creation of NATO and the Warsaw Pact and the escalation of Cold War. This principle is in line with the principles of the United Nations, is committed to respect for the sovereignty and integrity of all countries, advocates no interference in their internal affairs, and respect the different political and social regimes chosen by the history of their peoples. The new architecture for perpetual peace can be built from the United Nations and accompanied by the progressive dismantling of military pacts and the progressive reduction of mass destruction weapons, nuclear, chemical, biological, digital. The last political declaration of the representative of China, United Nations, reinforced this position. China wants that all mass destruction weapons be banished. What are United States playing against China Treaty and the China Global Development Initiative? In the beginning of December 2021, two documents established two opposite strategies to the world. The Global Development Initiative proposed by China on the United Nations Assembly in 2021 aims catch up and accomplish the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development on risk by pandemic and regional conflicts, with a strong contribution of China in all critical domains, from health to the green transition. The Department of Homeland Security from the United States government, on the line with the National Security Strategy, launched the China Strategic Action Plan to counter the threat posed by China, posed by People's Republic of China. The American plan accused China of rampant intellectual property theft, counterfeiting and piracy, and deflated commodity prices using forced labor, costing American jobs and decimating entire industries and towns throughout the United States. China is accusing of using immigration system and exploit United States business and academic institutions to obtain access to cutting-edge American technology and information, and two, of illicit training property and critical information, which undermines American safety of armed forces. And China is accused to be responsible for the tragic balance in the United States of COVID-19, more than 1 million of casualties. The policy announces the restriction and police surveillance of all activities and citizens of China in the United States, and the global partnership around all continents, including Arctic, but also the sidereal space, with the same negative intention. The European Union-China Comprehensive Agreement on the investment, it was the last victim of that aggressive plan. But that agreement can sustain the fall of Europe. When the China-European Union Comprehensive Investment Agreement, after 7 years of negotiations, was finally signed in December 2020, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, signaled its strategic importance for the European Union, already living in a new economic crisis accelerated by the pandemic, because this agreement, and I quoted, would allow unprecedented access to Chinese market. China and the European wanted to facilitate market access and reduce investment barriers, helping to recover European industry and economy in sectors such as transport, health, equipment, telecommunication. However, the European Union Parliament decreed sanctions against Xinjiang rulers, and China was responded with sanctions against some European Union officials, accomplishing the plan against China, whose leaders used again their influence over dominant parties in the European Parliament to suspend ratification of the agreement. Von Leyen was silenced. What really happens in Xinjiang? A pilot zone of eco-civilization. 90 ambassadors of Europe, in addition to Japan, Canada, and Australia, sent letters to United Nations Human Rights Council criticizing China policy in Xinjiang toward Uyghur Muslims. 65 countries, including the main Muslim countries, support the Chinese policy in Xinjiang through the response letter addressed to the same council, praising what they call China's remarkable achievements in the field of human rights. And they stress, faced with the grave challenge of terrorism and extremism, China has undertaken a number of counter-terrorism and radicalization measures in Xinjiang, including the creation of vocational training and educational centers. I quoted. None of the Muslim countries support United States accusations. I remember that United Nations Security Council Counter-Terrorism Committee recorded 16 years of terrorist attacks in Xinjiang. The letter that supports China is signed by major Islamic countries, including the allies from the United States, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Oman, Kuwait, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain. And the last but not least, why China talk about an economic war against their country? From the perspective of People's Republic of China, all the conflicts that the United States promoted directly or indirectly, using interference, aggression, and civil war, are part of a strategic plan to take the American hegemonism. The fusion of the complex military industrial with the oligarchy of finance, oil, real estate, and the media business create a deep social gap where 1% control 93% of the gross domestic product and the budget of the two hegemonic parties be dependent of their funding. From China's standpoint, a world divided by confrontation of blocs with military tactical conflicts, the supremacy of the basis of the environment sustainability are the core of United States political economy. In this framework,
I'm so sorry, 2 minutes left. 2 minutes left.
Sorry, I finished.
Okay. Sorry.
China defends the integrity of Ukraine, the right of Ukraine to choose the integration into European Union. But I said, Madame von Leyen, not postponing accession until the Greek calends, and the right of the Russian nation to ensure the security of its nation, taking the position of peace mediator that European Union has compromised. the implementation of China European Comprehensive Investment Agreement can involve Ukraine and the Eurasian countries on building a peaceful and common future and support a sustainable reconstruction of Ukraine. Thank you, and sorry for the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. António. And we are very welcome to publish your research in Ukrainian Chinese Studies Journal.
Thank you.
Our final speaker for today is Petro Shevchenko, Ukrainian scholar who is currently live and study in China, PhD researcher in Jilin University. As I know, his area of interest, Chinese economy, global order, international relations, and you are very welcome with the topic international economy, I'm so sorry. You are very welcome with the topic, the Russo-Ukrainian war prerequisites, perception in China, information control, mass media, reasoning, and America, the Great Satan narrative. Such an interesting topic. I can imagine how hard to read official Chinese media living in China for Ukrainian who knows the truth. You're very welcome.
Thank you. So firstly, I want to greet everyone, especially my countrymates, and one more time, congratulate everyone on our today's The Defenders Day. And our topic, my research is about, in the broad sense, it's about the US-China strategic competition. And when we are talking about it, when we are talking about the Russian-Ukrainian war, why we are also mentioning China? Because China is also involved. So firstly, what is really important for China? The stakes, because the result of this war, it can influence the result of the US-China competition. Who will take the lead of the world? Who will be responsible for the global governance? The second point, very important for China, is Taiwan. Because if the West will not protect its geopolitical spheres, this will decrease the confidence of the Taiwan administration. So that's the goal of Beijing. And the third, the outcome of the Russia-Ukrainian war will bring both opportunities and perils, risks for Beijing. So firstly, I want to start with my idea, with my argument that China doesn't see Ukraine, not because it has a pity on Ukraine or because it doesn't respect Ukraine, not at all. China has very profound respect for Ukrainians and Ukraine, because as far as you know, Chinese military strength was very heavily influenced by Ukrainian military experts, and the first Chinese aircraft carrier, it was imported from Ukraine. So of course, China has respect. But if we are talking from the geopolitical point of view, and especially from the realist point of view, so from this point of view, China perceives Ukraine as the part of the global American sphere of influence. And that's why when China is in the harsh, tough competition with the USA, of course, it will try to perceive its own politics within this confrontation framework. So I have three research arguments. So firstly, I want to say that China can't internally in media, different academic research papers, it can't perceive the war in a different way, because it will make the concession towards the USA. That's why China, it is protecting its own informational sovereignty. So it means that China is saying in its media, and of course, as far as we know, the special features of Chinese society, Chinese culture, what is the party the government is saying, it is spread across the society. Of course, some people, they can have another opinions in social media, as the Chinese colleagues, they said, their relatives, friends, they can have another point of views, but it doesn't change the whole picture. So that's why China, it protects its own informational sovereignty. When it has its own point of view, it says, this conflict, it was inspired by the NATO enlargement. And now NATO, it's also articulating because Josep Borrell, the head of the European Union's Foreign Affairs Office, and Stoltenberg, they said openly, China is a challenge for NATO and the European Union. So it means like the dots are connected. And the second argument is that China, of course, it employs this odd, strange rhetoric that it's not war, it's crisis or situation or something like this. But of course, if we are talking about like people who are taking the decisions, and for example, for me also as Oleksandra, I looked through some academic papers, I found that the position, the understanding is pretty clear. It's a war. It's a big war because between two geopolitical blocks, between the United West, between the Western Europe and the USA, and Ukraine, of course, our country, and Russia and some of its satellites. And China, it can't join this war, even if it wanted to join. This is impossible because China is still dependent on the USA. There is the strong interdependence between China and the USA. And thirdly, my third argument is that why China is employing this America the Great Satan narrative. Because, Chinese, when we are talking about China, we're not talking about the ordinary country. It's the civilization. As the American scientist, Lucien Pai, he said, China is the civilization, the country civilization. So that's why we should understand that they have their own understanding of those geopolitical conflicts, and they think they are the inter-civilization conflicts. And that's why they think if they want to improve their geo-economic and geopolitical positions, they should defeat the West, which is led by the USA. And by the way, China, they don't think that Russia is not the part of the West. They think it is the part of the West. And as far as we know, Chinese, they are thinking not like us. They are thinking using the stratagems. So that's why they are thinking, okay, we can divide the West, the whole West, it will be weakened, it will be better for us. So this is my third argument, that China, they are thinking in order to improve our own positions, we should weaken the USA and the West at all. So when I develop my first argument, I'm saying that, about the information control, that it was very interesting situation. When the war in Ukraine started, I mean, the whole scale in Ukraine, a lot of messages, narratives, they were spreading all over the world. And of course, some of them, they also appeared in Chinese media, but they couldn't make this way to the top of the society, to the decision makers. So it is because of the special features of the Chinese government media, which is totally controlled by the propaganda department of the party, of the Central Party Committee. So secondly, I would like to say that this research, which was made by Oleksandra and Yevheniia, they made very good job. I appreciate it very much about the content analysis of the academic papers. So I can add only one interesting detail, that a lot of scientists, yes, they're saying that this war, it can lead to the Russian defeat or to the defeat of Ukraine and the USA, but they all are saying that China should now stay neutral in order to later conduct its own policy with the purpose to overcome the world order established by the USA, and to have more fair multiracial order, where China will have more strong, more profound, more influential place. And what does it mean? Of course, it means that China, they want to push the USA, to push back the USA from the Asian region, and from the Western Pacific region at all. So this is their understanding how China should behave at the moment. So now still it should be quiet, but later they should be more assertive in conducting their own policy. Yes, even it was funny for me because there is one verb, 超越, like overcome. 超越, this like the Western built international order. And thirdly, my third argument was about this strategic why China is employing, why using this American, the great Satan narrative within their US-China strategic competition. So of course, first, a lot of students, a lot of people, they will say, come on, China and the USA are the real competitors. They're very good partners because the USA is, yes, it is the biggest Chinese trading partner, and China is the biggest American partner. And if you know, maybe if you remember, a few years ago, even there was one term, Chimerica, which meant the strong connections between China and the USA. So how they can be the competitors? So the answer is not they're competitors like they're going to fight, but it means that China wants to rebalance their relationship. It doesn't want anymore be kind of the global factory or the world fabric. It wants to be the partner which also can influence the USA. By the way, that's also this Putin's idea that Russia can be more strong, but of course it's impossible now, and it won't be impossible later because they already lost this war and initiative in it. So this is main Chinese idea, that it wants to have more, let's say, equal relationship with the USA. For example, Obama, he said during his presidency that he wants to make the G2 relationship with China, but it also meant that the USA will be some kind of supervisor over China. And of course, Xi Jinping, he didn't accept it. And you know, this is also very interesting from the Chinese point of view, because they are elite. People who are taking decisions, especially Xi Jinping. He's coming from the Red Prince group. He's the son of Xi Jinping, who was the, let's say this way, comrade of the Mao Zedong. And the Mao Zedong, he was the guy who was saying that he was calculating this reapproachment with the USA. And he was saying that now China needs the USA. Why? In order to become strong. But later, the USA will be afraid of China, and maybe they will try to slow down China. So he was saying, he was calculating. And at that time, when the USA is going to slow down China, China should quickly change the course of their strategic development. So he meant the global South. And also, if you remember, so Mao Zedong, he was also saying that China should maintain, develop relationships with the countries from Africa, from Asia, from the third world countries. So this is what can we see at the moment, that China, of course, it knows that the USA helped to develop the Chinese economy and so on. But still they think that now the USA is bad. Why? Because the USA, they want to preserve their hegemony, their global leadership. And China, they want to rebalance their position, not only within the relationship with the USA, but also globally, to become more influential geopolitically and geo-economically, to become the center of the Asian region. So for example, they already signed this agreement, RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So this is the first reason why China is promoting this global Satan narrative. The second reason is that Chinese elites, especially Xi Jinping, they are very good students of the fall of the Soviet Union. So they all are studying the reasons. Why did the Soviet Union fail? What were the reasons? Of course, they don't believe that the simple reason was the economic inefficiency. They are thinking in this way. the USA was plotting against the USA, against the Soviet Union. There was a plan how to use economical pressure, technological pressure, and so on to undermine the Soviet development. That's why now they are saying, yes, 30 years ago, Americans, they succeeded in the collapse of the Soviet Union. But now we should learn from those mistakes and don't repeat them. And of course, you know, in China, how people treat Gorbachev. They're saying he's a loser, and Deng Xiaoping he said, like, it is a citate, it's you can find it in the internet. Deng Xiaoping said Gorbachev is an idiot. So that's why this is the second point why Chinese are saying, like, America, this is the great Satan because they're trying to undermine our development and take over our sovereignty, so on. And the third point why China also is saying so, of course, it's Taiwan. Because if you look from the geopolitical point of view, you can see that the USA, Washington, they're using Taiwan as a leverage towards Beijing. Yep. For example, when the war started, there was a call between Joe Biden and Xi Jinping. And Joe Biden, he was saying to Xi Jinping that he should join this very big anti-Russian coalition somehow to influence Putin to withdraw troops. And the first question which Xi Jinping asked Biden, what about Taiwan? So this is the third reason why China is referring the USA as the global Satan. Also, during my research, I'm focusing on these connections between the global economic linkages between the USA and China. So firstly, because I understand it a little bit, and secondly, because China and the USA, they are in the very harsh, very fierce economic and technological competition. The USA, they are trying to slow down Chinese technological development. And recently, so the USA, they already signed, Biden, he signed the CHIPS pact, in order to stimulate the domestic production of the microchips. And also they put some sanctions on the companies that were exporting some microchips equipment to China. So also this is very important to understand that Chinese, they are very, very serious people. They're very concrete. They never do something just for fun. They always think before to do something, because this is country, this is civilization, which culture is based on the rights, on this logic. That's why, yep, there are some economic and also technological reasons why China and the USA, they are in this fierce confrontation, also informational. So, and finally, if you're talking about Ukraine, so I think that later, the relationship between China and Ukraine will be restored, and even maybe will be improved. Why? Because the main Ukrainian advantage, the market advantage, is the agricultural goods. And of course, China is dependent on the import of energy, agriculture, technologies. So I think that maybe in the near future, also Ukraine and China will find some opportunities to reestablish profitable and benefiting economic cooperation, and maybe at that time our relationship will be improved. So this is my vision. Maybe I'm mistaken. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Petro. You might know about Ukrainian parliament delegation to Taiwan next week.
Yes, I heard.
So it's
just for fun.
That just became complicated. Okay, so we have a Q&A section right now, and we have two questions from the audience. The first one from Volodymyr Panchenko to anyone who would like to answer. Will the media in China on the war in Ukraine come closer to what it developed by academic opinion? Will the media in China come closer to what it developed by academic opinion? Would like to answer?
I can say something.
Okay, thank you.
In Portugal, we are two sources of information from China. China International Radio and Cgtm. In this moment, I stay seeing Cgtm in my in Cgtm, the academic from Ukraine, from United States, from Europe, from China, they are called to debate all the problems, all the important problems of the world, like the war and the invasion of Ukraine. I think that, and in the radio, China International Radio, is common, the academics be called to write an article about a problem with global interest. Well, I think that they are present in the media that call to the West in the base of pluralism of opinions, credibility of the sources, and controversy and controversial debate. And they are present also in the two most important global media of ASEAN, Kaixing and Kaijing, that are very bad note in the West. One is organization of journalists, independent journalists, and the other is from Hong Kong and is controlled by the financial groups, but are very important and are completely independent of the government.
Okay, thank you so much. And a question to Peter from a guest. Thank you for your interesting presentation. I wonder if you have some comments about how to interpret the concept of global security initiative launched by Xi Jinping in April 2022.
All right, good. So actually, I was already typing, but okay, let me answer orally. For Chinese, they are trying to wait for the right moment. They never hurry up. So if they see, for example, like this happened in Davos in 2017, when the Trump was saying the USA will withdraw from those global institutions, who was the first to say, if you are withdrawing, then we will come. It was Xi Jinping who said it in Davos. So the same situation here. So Xi Jinping, he is trying to present the option for Asian states, both economically and also giving some safety guarantees. And it can't be the alternative international order. Maybe, at the moment it can be the attempt to establish something which can be like an option. But at the moment, still Chinese economy is not enough strong to maintain very profound safety guarantees. But maybe later, for example, in 2030, maybe it will be possible for China if they continue growing economically. So now it's like an attempt, but later, if they will have enough economic might, this may be possible. And the Asian attempt, if they succeed to establish this this regional order in China, maybe based on the historical tributary system. So if they are successful in establishing this regional order in Asia, so maybe later it can be spread on the globe, and maybe even some European states, African states, they also will be very interested to join. For example, like nowadays Hungary, because Orban, he's saying that the president of the Hungary, he's saying we are interested in cooperation with China, and also we are ready to become the first European partner of China who will trade using yuan, not dollar. So it's a very interesting position of the European state, and it's also a very big achievement of China that already some even European states, they are ready to accept the rules made by Beijing, not by Washington.
Thank you so much. And another question from Oleksandra Stryzhak.
Yeah, right. Thank you. I also want to ask, to Petro. Yeah, so
Okay.
I have two questions. So the first, you were talking at the beginning about that the Chinese perceive Ukraine as a part of, I don't want to say the sphere of influence. I don't remember the exact words that you used, but yeah, something like this. So like the part of American world, I don't know. So I'm curious from what times, like since the invasion or earlier. And another one about NATO, as you said, right? NATO, like first time. Stated as China to be the challenger to the NATO, but what you would say about the meeting at the end of September between Stoltenberg and 1E, because what I've seen from the academic community, they were actually also quite surprised to like, because I just checked the report from Chinese embassy in Sweden, and the words that they use, it's quite like such a good meeting, and we have so many things to do together. Combat, like to cooperate
Terrorism.
on arms control, right? Terrorists should be, this is the thing that I wanted to say, but yeah, I wasn't sure. Climate change and blah blah blah. So how would you? So where is that? So it's actually, they said that this is like China is the biggest challenger, but at the same time, and as I said, it was actually also perceived as kind of like a lot of people were kind of like, wow. Like they just stated we are the challenger, and now we have such a how you understand it. Thank you.
Yeah, how that can be combined, how that can be logically connected. So the first question, I think that China, it actually tried to involve Ukraine into its own sphere of influence. And it happened in 2013 when the former president Yanukovych, he traveled to Beijing. And after that meeting with Xi Jinping, there was a statement that Ukraine is considering joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So that was the first step. And the second step, also, as far as you know, Yanukovych, he returned to Ukraine with money, with some contracts, and also he received some credits, some loans from China. And also, I think that at that time, when China was already was planning about the One Belt, One Road initiative. So I think that Ukraine was considered as one of the hubs of that initiative. But later, what happens? Euromaidan, and later, as far as you remember, in Taiwan, what happened? The Sunflower Revolution, Taiyanhua Xueyun, the movement of those sunflower students, whatever. So they also lead to the change of the government, because the pro-Chinese Kuomintang party, it was changed with the DPP leaders who are very inclined, who are not inclined to the reapproachment with China. They are against China, the mainland of China. So I think that starting from 2014, China, they started to perceive Ukraine as the we can't also in the literature there is a word client state, the country which is influenced by someone using the policy, economy, especially using the economic statecraft. So using money and so on to influence the decision making. So for example, for me as Ukrainian, it's not very pleasant to talk about this, but as the person who graduated from the economic university, I can say that our economy, it was very strongly influenced by the Western states, and our economy, it was maintained by the IMF, International Monetary Fund loans. So of course, China, it was looking at this and it was considering that maybe Ukraine it has been already under the Western influence. And later, as far as you remember what happened, the Motor Siege case, when John Bolton, the national, was not China the biggest, maybe China or Russia, I don't remember clearly, but yeah, some of them. And at that time, it's John Bolton, he arrived to Kyiv and talked with our president, Vladimir Zelensky, and later our government decided to stop the deal. From our point of view, from our national interests, maybe it was right if we had the plan how to develop that industry. But as far as I remember, maybe this project, I mean, this enterprise, it was not invested so well that it can make good profits or go to some international overseas markets. I don't know. So it was the second signal from Ukraine. And I would say the third signal from our country, maybe it was One Belt, One Road. Because, you know, our government, they really started from Poroshenko's period. They didn't put enough efforts to join this initiative. And I think it was not just simple decision, or it was abandoned. The Chinese direction was abandoned. I think it was part of somehow plan. But of course, our government and Ukraine, it has the excuse because the Crimea was already occupied, and in the east of Ukraine there was a war with, of course, with those proxy states supported by Russia. So maybe it can be somehow our excuse, because from the Ukrainian point of view, Ukraine didn't have another choice rather than just somehow align with the West in order to protect its independence. The second question was about how this logic can be explained between NATO and China. So you said China is the biggest threat, the biggest challenge. The biggest threat, the biggest challenge is Russia. Yeah, China was considered as a systematic challenge or something like this. So it means that also NATO, when they just stated those words, yep, challenger. So it means that NATO clarified its position that NATO is going to deter China, not attack China, but to deter. It means to keep those Western geopolitical positions, including Taiwan. Because as far as you remember, after that statement, a few German ships, they went through they just went near Taiwan. And so, of course, for China, it was not pleasant. The meeting between Wang Yi and Stoltenberg, maybe it can make any sense. But as far as you remember, before the invasion to Ukraine, Lavrov met with Blinken. So it can be just the meeting. And I think that the main goal of the meeting between Chinese and Europeans is not about NATO. It's not about something like this. It's about the USA. Because the European Union, the Europe, they still are strongly influenced by the USA, especially from the safety point of view. And China, they want to push Europeans to the strategic autonomy. They want the Europe to be at least somehow independent from the USA. That's why also, as you know, the China, they pushed that project with the investment deal. They also were saying that we can give you more money, just share your technologies and open your markets. But also this initiative, it was failed. So I think that that's the main point of those connections between NATO and China. So yeah, maybe it's also about this European security, not about this one, Taiwan or so on. Because of course, if one day Xi Jinping, he decides to try to conquer, to reunite with Taiwan, of course, the main actor will not be European Union, it will be the USA. And Biden, he said it, right? That if something happens, then he will be able to send the American soldiers to the island. So it's this.
Thank you so much for your answer. And the last question from my side, anybody please answer. I'm currently in the US and with a short visit, and yesterday I had a long conversation with an American professor of finance about the future global leadership. And he posed me a question I would like to ask you as well. What are the Chinese values they can offer to the world as a potential next global leader? Because it's unclear here, like in American order, human rights protection, freedom of speech, market economy, it's everybody knows and everybody can accept. What are Chinese values to the world can be accepted as a next global leader? Any volunteers?
If you,
Yes,
I can,
please.
I can that. I think that is a good theme for the next conference.
Just briefly.
But and is my position that we can debate that problem in this contest. But if nobody wants to put other questions, I would like to have 2 minutes to make a personal statement, if I can.
2 minutes, okay.
Okay, 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
I was born in the last fascist and colonialist country of Europe. It was the poorest and most economically backward of Europe. For 13 years, all the young men of Portugal was sent to fight against the guerrilla of colonial liberation movements. Near 1,004,100 boys from a country with only 10 million of people. We've measured the 3 fronts of combat in parallel with the Vietnam War. My generation, myself, and the peoples of Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau suffered more casualties, deaths, and material loss than United States and Vietnam. But war and the resistance against war generated a democratic revolution in April 1974, the Coronation Revolution. More than 500,000 Portuguese was forced to return from colonies, and millions of immigrants not came back. However, the peace and independence of colonies opened the way of reconciliation. Africans began to make Portugal the second homeland, and the people of Portugal returned to the new African countries as teachers, doctors, entrepreneurs, and workers. Today, we build a common future with the community of Portuguese-speaking countries. Only with perpetual peace, the dead people can rest in peace. For the bottom of my heart, I wish to the peoples of Ukraine and Russia peace and reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'm afraid we are very close to the end of the conference. It's been a wonderful and productive discussion on the Ukrainian platform for contemporary China, United Ukrainian, Chinese, European scholars. I'd like to express again my gratitude to the organizers, the Ukrainian Association of Sinologists, the Krinsky Institute of Oriental Studies, and Helvetica Publishing House, our media partner, and huge thanks to all panelists, Yevheniia, Tanina, Oleksandra, Zichen, Botao, Zhigang, António, and Petro, for your time, for wonderful and professional presentations, for your critical thinking. And in your work, I can see the contribution to informational support of Ukraine, direct or indirect, because every deep research can show the truth on the Russian-Ukrainian war, which a lot of people don't want to see, unfortunately. Stay tuned on the future event on the platform, on our platform, and have a pleasant end of the day. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
And goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.